Thanks everybody for joining us today, and welcome to another edition of our Gimmal Education series. My name is Marcia Shields, and I'm part of our customer success team. Jeff, if you could go to the next slide. Thank you. Thank you so much. With me today is Jeff Tuish. Jeff is going to be your subject matter expert, talking about all things Gimmal Discover today. Today's session is going to be about how Gimmal Discover can be helpful when you are planning a data migration. Just a few housekeeping items. Our session will run for about 30 minutes. We typically go 20 minutes for Jeff's demonstration, and then we'll answer questions after. Questions are definitely welcomed. Please, if you can, at the bottom of your Zoom bar, there's a Q&A area. If you have questions during the session, please just post them there. I'll keep an eye on that, and I'll tee them up for Jeff when we get to the Q&A area after that. You probably heard, but the session is being recorded. So it will be shared after the event via email and also posted on our Gimmal YouTube channel. Next slide, Jeff, please. Yeah, so before we get to the main event, just a reminder, we have a lot of All-Stars so far, but plenty of time to earn your badges. Everybody here today is getting All-Star points, so we appreciate that. The program's been pretty fun, and we really like to see everybody taking advantage of that. Before we kick things over to Jeff, I am going to launch a quick poll question related to today's topic. And the question is, what's your biggest challenge with data migration right now? So we'd love to hear from you, get some input. Jeff, I'm going to let that keep running as others join, and I will share the results after.
Perfect.
So with that said, I will let you do your thing.
Great. And suddenly I can't advance the slide. There we go. Okay, everybody. I hope everybody's doing well. And just to make sure you guys understand why I'm wearing orange and blue, I couldn't decide if I wanted to be doing the Gimmal blue or the Morae orange. So I decided, well, let's just do both. So hence the colors. I'm not doing a Florida Gator thing as one of our, as Christina pointed out here, one of the people I work with. So we're going to talk about migrations today. And what we're going to talk about is how to plan for them, not actually perform them, but being able to understand what data we want to include and exclude in that migration. So a little story for you. When you're going through and doing the migrations, obviously there's a lot of things to consider in here. And you'll see the different types of migrations, and I'm just giving you some examples. At the corporate level, very common, we're seeing a lot of Exchange on premises going to Exchange online. So a lot of times people want to go through and prune the mailboxes prior to the actual migration, which we'll be talking about. Another one is going SharePoint on-prem to SharePoint online, very common thing as well. Same kind of thing, do some cleanup. Windows file shares in the SharePoint and either on-prem or online, either one, being able to have that data through there. And then from the user level, and what I mean that is not like a user doing the migration, but user data for either going from endpoints into OneDrive. A lot of companies are starting to get rid of hard drive saves because it's a distributed data model is a scary thing for legal, not knowing what's on somebody's hard drive. So they're trying to put it into OneDrive. And then lastly, people that are using still Windows file shares, which are quite often, many companies are doing that. And they have home drives. So places where each user has their own folder and where they store their data, that's also getting moved into OneDrive. So those are the 5 different types. And there's a couple things that I want to talk about regarding that. And those are the methodologies. So there's 2 different things here. Lift and shift means I'm just going to take all the data that I have in the source and move it to the target. Not the most recommended method if you can prevent it for several reasons. One, obviously, it's going to take longer. 2, do you have data that you really don't need in your repository? Third, you're going to be taking up more space out there in your target by not cleaning up your data. But then the other option is to do a smart migration. Go through and determine what you want to move and only move that data, whether that being deleting things prior or just filtering out the things you want to migrate and leaving the rest of the stuff behind. So I'm going to focus on the smart migration. So I'm going to tell you a little story of one of my friends did when they, and this actually is relevant, when they bought a new house. They decided, they went through their kitchen utensil drawer and they said, what do we use? And what they ended up doing was they actually did some rot remediation. So ROT standing for redundant, obsolete, trivial. So basically they found things that they might have purchased but have never used or have seldom used in their utensil drawer. So what they did, which was very wise, when they got to their new house, they left everything in the box in their kitchen. And as they used things, they put them into the drawers and cabinets. And then after a year, if it's still in the box, probably don't need it anymore. Same kind of thing happens with data. As users, and I'm not picking on users because I am one as well, we love to hoard stuff. We love to keep stuff out there. And you'll see the different considerations we have for deciding what data we want to move. So the sensitive data, things like that are maybe proprietary or legally based, whatever they might be. You can define the different types of sensitive data in that. That also include personal data, possibly. So credit card numbers, social security numbers, what have you. The obsolete data, this is the most common stuff. This is the stuff that, oh, I'm going to use that someday, like I have in my garage with a tool, and I never end up using it. So the obsolete data, the things that just aged out and don't help you with anything, they're just taking up space out there. The inaccessible data, pardon me, inaccessible data meaning that files that you probably can't open anymore because the application that created them, you might not have them. So examples of that like WordPro, Lotus 123, anything that is old software, you still have the files from 20 years ago, but there's no way to getting to them, so why move it? Trivial data, that might be the most subjective data. Things like pictures from the company Christmas party, or maybe pictures of your kids or anything you put on there, anything to do with games or movies or whatever it might be. That's the kind of trivial data I'm talking about. And then lastly, redundant, which we love to keep multiple copies of things, don't we? So this is going through and making sure that we are only keeping one copy, and determining the winner of that is not it's not something you can technically do very easily unless you know that, for instance, I pick on Windows file shares being the source of our migration. If I know that particular locations are the gospel data, and then I find the same file somewhere else where I'm going to make sure that that gospel data that I'm defining here is where I migrate, and the rest of the data is truly redundant and I don't need it any longer. So just going through all that. So how do we make these considerations? How do we go through and being able to use some technology to help us understand what the heck we can do with this stuff? So first off, and these are actually in an order, believe it or not. I have these in an order, and then I'll explain as I go why they're in this order. So first off, going through the classification. Now, this and obsolete, they could be reversed, but basically what I want to do is I'm trying to say, let's go through and identify, and I'm going to pick on Windows again, file shares. So let's go through and find the data that we believe we need to keep. So anything that we can do to be able to say, and you'll see the different categories here, financial, legal, regulatory, whatever it might be, and some examples for each one of those. But those are going to, obviously are going to change depending on what business you're in and what have you. So what we're doing on this is to be able to apply labels to the data. And then from this point forward, we can reference those labels to determine, is this something I want? So if something's marked as a contract and I need to keep my contracts infinitely, then when I go through my remediation of obsolete data, which is the next category, I can say, hey, I marked this thing as a contract, even though it's older than the 10 years that we're going to use as our criteria to decide things that are obsolete. I know that's an exception to that rule. So I'm going to keep that data longer. So going through and applying these classifications. Now, this is going to be an iterative process. And what I mean by that, I'm working with some companies right now when we're going through and we're perfecting the criteria. So what is that criteria? Well, what we can do with Gimmal Discover is we have the ability to look at metadata as well as content. And when we look at metadata, it all depends on what kind of data it is. If it's numeric data, obviously we can say like the size of a file, is it greater or less than a certain size? That's pretty simple. If it's a date and date time kind of field, then we can look at that as well to see, how old is this, what have you. But then you get into the textual metadata. Now you can really do a lot of different decisions. And I'm not listing those here. I've done this on previous education sessions, but things like looking at the file name. or looking at for an exact match, or the extension. I only want to do TXT files, or I want to exclude all GIF files, what have you. You can go through that. You can also do a wildcard to be able to, like the old DOS commands, showing my age here, but you can go through and use an asterisk to be able to say, hey, anything that matches this, I want to assign a particular classification. So that's for the metadata. When you get into the content, you have even more power. In the content, you can go through and you can look at all of the content of the files. And Discover has about 220 some odd different file types that we can actually crack open and look at the content within them, as well as we can also look at some image files as well and be able to find the text within those image files and then make decisions based upon the textual match we found. So what you would do is you would create a search expression that can be just a keyword. It can be multiple keywords separated by ands and ors. It could be a phrase, which is an embedded space inside, like somebody's name, like John Smith. You would put double quotes around that. You can also do, in addition to the ands and ors, you can do excludes and proximity, meaning that are these two words within 10 words of each other? You can do, what else haven't I mentioned? Not saying I don't want this value. You can do parentheses like you do an order of operations for mathematical equations, the same kind of thing. So you can really make these Boolean searches be very complex. And lastly, you can also use regular expressions or regex, which will help you find patterns, looking for social security numbers or credit cards or any kind of pattern-based data that we can assign these classifications to. So it's really key to go through. If you know that there are going to be exceptions to the obsolete criteria that you're going to develop, I would highly recommend you do this classification so that those files have that label on them. And when it comes time to actually start deleting things, we know what to include or exclude based upon that. Okay, enough about classification. Let's move on to obsolete. So obsolete is very date-based. And a great example of that, we have a lot of people that are doing email retention policy enforcement. They find that Exchange Online or on-prem doesn't give them the granularity that they need to be able to make the full decisions that they need to do in processing the folders and the mailboxes and the archives, what have you. So going through and making decisions based upon the dates that are relevant to the data source. So if you're in a Windows file shares, you have created, modified, and accessed. If you're in SharePoint or OneDrive, you have created and modified. There's no access property we can use. If we're on email, then we have created, modified, received, sent, start date, end date, whole bunch of different things depending on if it's a calendar entry or a regular message. So there's a lot of things that you can go through and make these checks on. Getting to the inaccessible, that's what I was talking about already. So you don't have the mother application anymore that made that original file. So probably a good chance you don't need that file anymore. And we have a list of about 1,600 different extensions that we use to determine what's inaccessible. And those can be easily altered. You say, hey, I still use Lotus Notes and NSF formats. I need to keep those files. Great, then we'll take them out of the list. So it's something you can manipulate. The trivial data, like I said, that's all going to come down to very subjectiveness on what is trivial to you. So here's some ideas. Maybe the file name or the folder name, it's the author of it. If you're talking about email, maybe the domain of the sender. So just things that you can go out and check to say, is this something that I know I can get rid of based upon this? So I'm really find a lot of trivial emails are ones that are system generated, and the administrators have a lot of email from system generated messages. So we know we don't have to retain those for a long period of time. We get into redundant, and now we're talking about duplicates. And what do I mean by duplicates? So I'm not talking about the file name. If we're back to Windows file shares, not the file name being the same, not the folder name being the same. The dates typically are going to be the same. I'll talk about why that might not be true. But what we're going to do is we're going to go out and look at the content of the files and messages. So regardless of all the rest of the metadata, we're looking at content only. And what we produce is a 32-character hexadecimal hash value. And we say if two files have the same hash, they're duplicates. So I said the date usually is the same, but if you opened a file and saved it without making a change, the modification date is going to be different on one of the files, but the content's going to be the same. So it can happen, but most likely they're going to have the same date. I would guarantee the same size, but the file names and the locations can be anything. Then we get into the sensitive data, and this is where we're talking about all the different types, and that's going to be something that you're going to have to determine. And honestly, going through the classification and the sensitive data, that's where you get into content searching and looking to see what is inside these files and messages. And these are going to be unique to you and across the industries. So it's going to be up to you to decide, what do we have that we need to keep? I mean, the things that we don't want to have happen is everybody's concerned about privacy anymore. And no offense, but it's not going to be if I get breached, it's when I get breached. So what kind of data do you have out there? And what we do here at Gimmal Morae is we're looking at the data that is high risk and low value. You have a high risk and low value. If it doesn't have any value, but it has a lot of risk that could compromise something when a breach happens, then why are you keeping it? So that's the kind of stuff I'm talking about going through, and that sensitive data. Let's determine. I mean, HR stuff, obviously you need to keep, but there's stuff out there that has high risk but very or no value at all, then why are you keeping it? So talked about all the things we can do. Now what I'll do is I want to show you, we're going to leave PowerPoint for a second, and we're going to, this is glasses worthy, so I got to put my glasses on. I'm going to show you some of the things that Gimmal Discover can do for you from a report standpoint. So what Gimmal Discover does, we can go through in our data governance module, and we can produce reports in there. And that report is going to be basically whatever columns you decide you want that report to have. And it's loading right now, so I didn't have it loaded prior. Sorry about that. I didn't think it'd take that long. There we go. So this is a Power BI report. So basically, we create a report inside of Discover, and we can export that to a CSV file. And what I'm doing here is saying, here are the classifications that have been assigned to our files. And you're going to notice very similar and all these Power BI. On the left-hand side, we're going to see the menu. That's going to give us some summary information about, in this case, how many different data targets or Windows file paths, so UNC paths we searched, the total number of folders, its files, its size, how many were classified, because not everything's going to be classified, and then give you some timings on how fast we can do this. And I can certainly get into this in another session, which might be a good education session to talk about scalability with Gimmal Discover and how we can make the throughput be even faster than this, and that can be done. But then over here on these matrices, we're going to see the list of the different classifications with all the data available, and the same thing with the extensions. So this is all the extensions that we're finding out here. So I just want to give you some insight as to what we're having. So here we go. Here are all the files that are being classified. Notice the cyan color here. That means none. So we aren't assigning classifications. This is probably our data that we can go through and start cleaning up with an obsolete kind of retention on it. So how old is too old? Let's get rid of it. This data, however, is probably something we need to keep. So we've assigned that classification label. And now we know that even though it is older than the amount that we're going to assign, we might want to retain those longer. And then I broke it out over here. I left out the none just to give you an idea of what slices we have that are bigger than others and their totals. Of course, if you hover over them, you'll see the numbers. And then here with just a breakdown of the extensions. Lastly, all this is doing is showing us, in this case, we're doing user folders or user drives, as people call them, on the Windows file shares. And just to see what kind of volume we have out there, maybe we'll find out who our major hoarder is. So here we have a winner with 14,000 files sitting out there. So just give an idea what's in there. We're not deleting anything at this point. We're just analyzing the data, providing an inventory of what we found to give you some insight. And then the last one is one of my favorites. You can go through, these are called slicers in Power BI. I can choose my classifications, my age range, and my extensions. And then this matrix over here on the right is going to be affected by it. So if I select human resources, these numbers are going to change based upon my additional selections. So something pretty cool. So that's the classification. Then we get into the keywords. So the same kind of thing we did with the classifications, we can go through and use keywords and saying, okay, what kind of hits do I have out there? And this one, I'm sort of simulating an insurance company going after a car accident kind of information, but same kind of information available, being able to show all this data and get some insight as to what we have out there. So one of the things that I'm doing right now with a client is we're going through and we're trying to perfect their keywords and their classifications. And we're going through an iterative process. We're going to go through and they say, here's our keywords we want to use. And these are the classifications that are going to be assigned. They say, well, I'm not quite sure about that. Let's go and adjust our criteria and run this again. So we're all in simulation mode. You can do it over and over until you perfected that. And then you can say, now I'm ready to pull the trigger and actually do all this work. But this is going to be a very iterative process. The good news is once you get one department done or section, whatever it might be, hopefully a lot of that criteria is going to be addressable in the other ones as well. So you don't have to start from scratch. You can reuse this. So that comes in handy as well. And then the last one I want to show you is what we call riot or rot. You probably have heard the term rot. I just defined that earlier. What's the I for? Remember I talked about the inaccessible files? That's what this is for. So this is a riot report. Once again, just going out and saying, what the heck do we have out there in the information? And I want to be able to seal this data so I can get an idea of what it is, because a lot of you guys might not know what is on your file shares in SharePoint, in OneDrive, whatever your unstructured data source might be. So what we want to do is provide some insight, or like we call it, shining a light on the dark data. And this is taking a while to load here, so I'll just keep on talking while we're waiting for that. But basically what we're going to go through is we're going to give you the redundant information, the obsolete information, the trivial information, and how we ascertain that. And then lastly, that riot, that inaccessible extensions, you see, you're going to find that over here. So what we're going to see on this is, once again, we're going to get a full summary of this data. And then we're going to go through, and I'll just talk about it since I can't show it to you. I'll paint a good picture. Once again, we're giving you a full inventory of the data targets, and then we're going to break it down. We've made up 10 different age ranges. I believe they're like 0 to 1 years, oh, here we go, some success, 1 to 3, 3 to 5, what have you. In fact, let me just click on that one. There we go. So 0 to 1, 1 to 2. These age ranges could be anything you want. Of course, just giving you an idea, saying, wow, okay, we're going to delete anything older than 7 years. Bam, here's our files that are deletion candidates, which they might not be deleted because maybe they're being classified as a particular type that I want to keep longer. So I just want to give you full insight on the creation, the modified, and the access date. And any one of these three can be used in your criteria for the obsolete process. And then breaking down once again by extensions. Even showing you which ones are accessible. Like we know we can open up PowerPoint. But however, AmiPro, that is from Lotus from the, I'm aging myself here, from the 80s and 90s. So we probably can't open those anymore. But once again, you could actually affect this list and say, hey, we still use AmiPro, and I don't want to show that as inaccessible. Great, we'll take it out of the list. Pretty simple. Then we go ahead and isolate the extensions that are inaccessible. We show you the duplicate information. Once again, here's a little header down here showing you that we're using the content, so give an idea of how many duplicates we have sitting out there. And then through our experience of doing all this rot remediation, we have identified things that we feel are high confidence, things that you could go out and delete right now without asking anybody, saying, I know these are deletion candidates. Files that have the word delete in them, or backup, or temporary internet, or anything of medium confidence. Maybe you'll see the different categories. Maybe there's something I need to check with somebody. But just to go after the low-hanging fruit to give you some insight. Then we pull out the extensions for all the confidence-based files. And then lastly, my favorite, and I promise this will be the last thing here, my favorite, and this is basically we took a tachometer from like a manual transmission of a car, and we're saying that anything between 0 and 1.5 we feel is acceptable. Anything between 1.5 and 3 is warning. And then if you're pegging red, and you'll notice that for the dates here, we're using 10 years, and yours could be anything, and these will adjust accordingly. Then anything you're pegging red on, then you probably should have some concerns about that and may want to take some action on it. So these are all the things to consider about migrating data. And let me go ahead and start this guy back up from not the beginning. We'll get back to where we were. So that's what I wanted to show you, was all the things that Gimmal Discover can do to help interrogate both the metadata and content, to help you make some smart decisions on what data you want to migrate, and more importantly, probably what data you don't want to migrate. Marcia, back to you.
I'm coming back. Great stuff, Jeff. And we had a great one of our attendees made a great point and a comment to me.
Okay,
It's important to know that you can't just delete rot, and I know you'd agree with this because you really should consult with your records manager if there's a company
agreed.
or a compliance policy in place, just to ensure everybody's on the same page. So I thought that was a great point to make.
That is a great comment. If I can segue off of that, actually, Marcia.
Please do.
So one of the things we're trying to convince people to do is you make all of your decisions up front. So legal, risk, whoever's be involved saying, okay, this is our criteria. And now when it comes time to delete, you don't have to ask, you just do. So you don't have to say, hey, can we delete this? Well, wait. We already decided anything older than 10 years old that is not one of these classifications is being deleted. So why are we going down the path of asking again? Because when you go down that path, it ends up being a circle and you end up never deleting because there's going to be one person that's going to say, I'm going to need that in 5 years. Is that a good reason to keep it?
And Jeff, I know we've over the years working with all kind of different companies and organizations. The hardest part is the planning part and to actually
It
set the
is.
course. It's I wish that would have changed, but it really hasn't. It's still hard. It's still
So
hard.
true.
Yeah, great information. I'm going to actually share out on that. I'm going to share out the results
Oh,
from the
awesome.
poll question. Appreciate that. I don't know if you can see that, Jeff, but it looks like we're in a tie with biggest challenge being budget and resources and also technical complexity. So hopefully today sheds some light on where a tool like Discover can help identify and automate these things that people are looking to do as they plan for migrating. On that too, I have a couple questions, Jeff.
Okay.
So bear with me. Let me do this. Okay, so first question is, can Discover manage a hybrid SharePoint environment? And if so, how?
Yes, actually we can. So the way Discover works is that we install, not to get too technical on everybody, but we install what's called connector and agents on a VM on-prem, so in your environment. And if you have both SharePoint on-prem and SharePoint online, we would need to have two VMs because one VM is going to be dedicated to communicating with on-prem while the other one's working on the online. So as long as you have two VMs spun up and we can apply the same rules, so all the things that you're doing, if you want to apply the same retention to both, great. If you only want to apply it to the on-prem ones, great. So it can be sliced and diced however you like. But yes, we
Okay,
can do that.
great. Thanks, Jeff.
Sure.
Another question is, can you provide an example of how Discover allows a migration, to only migrate a subset of data from an endpoint?
Oh, from endpoints.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay, so what we typically recommend is because once again, it's user data, right? So it's sitting out there in the hard drives, but that's scary in some respects. But what we've seen is that we don't want possibly to move the data. We could. So one of the things that Gimmal Discover could do is it could actually be running on the endpoints. It could go through and scan the data, maybe apply the classifications. And then let's say we did all that. And now the classified data is still on the endpoint. Now what we can do is we can copy or move those files to another location that's standard on every endpoint in the environment. And now when it comes time for the migration from endpoint to OneDrive, we know what data we're going to go after. So we're not trying to just manage everything. We're going to go out and find that sensitive data, the proprietary, whatever it might be. So to make sure that we have it in OneDrive or in SharePoint, whichever one you want to put it in. But what we basically do is find a location or define a location on the endpoint that everybody's desktop would have this folder on it. And that's where we put the files. And from there, that's the source into the migration.
Okay. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I mean, I know, but for some time we've had large clients do a lot of endpoint work.
Yes,
Traditionally, that has been the hardest to get to and manage. So that's great.
absolutely. And once again, it's distributed. So legal's not thrilled about
Yeah.
distributed data. So
Yeah, correct. One last question, unless anybody else submits one. Can Discover assign purview sensitivity labels to files on a Windows file share?
yes, we can actually. So that's something new for us. So what that means is that for those of you who are familiar with Purview, you can only assign labels to things that Purview can manage, which is the M365 stack. So online Exchange, Teams, OneDrive, and SharePoint. However, one of the things we can do with Discover is we can download those purview labels and then allow you to use those to assign a label to a file. And then there's a point to this. And then when you get the file, actually have the purview label assigned to it on the Windows file share, and you migrate that to SharePoint, that label's going with it. So you know that when you're doing the migration, you actually have the sensitivity labels already assigned instead of having to do it post-migration.
Gotcha. Great. Cool. Yeah, that is newer this year for sure. So, that is all the questions. You were off the hot seat, Jeff.
Okie dokie.
Yeah, if you could just go to the next slide and we'll do a little wrap up because we're at the end of our session today. But thank you everybody for joining. We really appreciate your time. If you're joining us later, not live, we hope you enjoy the recording. If you go back one more slide.
Oh, yep. Sorry
Yeah,
about that.
yeah, perfect. Yeah. And if you're like we're still have a lot of live events coming up for this year. So if you're going to be at any of these, please let us know. I just threw up a poll question. But yeah, here's the remaining sessions for Q3. We got one coming up for Gimmal Physical in a couple weeks, and then also one for our Gimmal Records product. You're welcome to join us. We hope to see you there. Q4 education schedule is being worked on now, so we'll get that out to you probably in about a month. I think that's all we have today. If you guys have any suggestions for us for future sessions, don't be shy. Please send those our ways. We'll be happy to consider them and put them in the mix. Thank you very much, everybody. We'll see you
Thanks,
next
everyone.
time.
Stay safe.
Bye-bye.